It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our 2025 Newsmaker of the Year, Ken Rickey. Ken Rickey has spent more than 4 decades building businesses that have reshaped private aviation. As the chairman of FlexJet, he has guided the Richmond Heights based company through a transformative year marked by historic capital investment, global expansion, and long term fleet commitments measured in the billions. In 2025, FlexJet secured the largest equity investment in private aviation history while advancing next generation aircraft and infrastructure design to meet evolving global demand. Through disciplined growth and strategic vision, Rickey has positioned Northeast Ohio at the center of a worldwide aviation enterprise. Mr. Rickey? Well, thank you for being here, Ken. We're so glad you could
It's
join
my
us.
pleasure. My pleasure. I came
Absolutely.
from Milan to be here,
Well, if
which is
anyone,
not, it was just normal for me anyhow.
well, we appreciate you being in
Thank
Cleveland
you.
and making the trip. Um, I was wondering if you could take us back to the beginning. You started with a small charter company in 1981, and today directional aviation and FlexJet represent roughly $4 billion in annual revenue and have a global footprint. So, what is the earliest risk you took that if it had gone the other way, we wouldn't be sitting here?
So I think in business there's two ways you get successful. One is that you're just passionate about business, and so you could run a foundry, you can run a McDonald's, you can run an airline. The other people that are successful get passionate about the business they're in. And so they just love what they do. And that identifies me. From an early age, I was enamored with travel. I thought about being a pilot. I remember I grew up in South Euclid, and the biggest argument in our family, we lived in a 900 square foot home. I'm an only child. We had 3 bedrooms. One of the bedrooms was converted to a den. And in that den was that old aluminum lawn furniture with the
Yep.
nylons. And since we had no air conditioning, in the summer, the lawn furniture went outside and the den was empty. And my mom was always upset about that. And my dad would never spend money on that den because every spare amount of income he had was to travel. And so I learned this love of traveling from my dad early on. And I think that was I never wanted good lawn furniture. I was always a traveler. And so my career began for the first 4 years, it really wasn't about business. It was about flying. And the path of a pilot is very difficult. I flew air freight. I flew for the airlines. I was a flight instructor. At that point in time, it wasn't really a stable industry. And I was flying for Northwest Orient and got furloughed. Furloughed's a fancy term for you don't have a job. And so I came back to Cleveland at that time, hat in hand, lived with my parents. And I was flying as a pickup pilot for a company called J&J Aviation. Now, J&J was a legitimate company, but like not really. It had in the 80s they had investment tax credits, and so J&J had some airplanes, and then they had some Phantom airplanes, and these tax credits were sold fraudulently. And I got to know the dispatcher really well, and one day it all came to a close. And see, they were going to shut down the company. And there were a few airplanes and customers left, so this friend calls me and he says, you should buy the company. And I was like, I saw it as a way to make a stable income, at least not to get furloughed again. And so I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I'm going to buy this company, J&J Aviation. I'm going to change the name to Corporate Wings. And he said, well, how much is the company? And I said, well, it's $27,500. And he said, well, how are you going to pay for it? And I said, well, they have $27,000 in the bank. So I think I can just buy the company and use the 27 grand that they have to buy it. And he goes, well, where are you getting the other 500? And I said, well, why do you think I called you? So that was it really wasn't my risk. My dad took the risk with the $500.
Isn't that wonderful? That's wonderful. That early risk was personal then, and then over time, the risks that you were taking, they weren't just about your own capital. They become about employees and customers and investors. And in 2008, during the Great Recession, those stakes got real. If you remember aviation, I'm sure you do, aviation was in free fall. There were fuel spikes and bankruptcies and collapsing demand. And around that time, you stepped back in. You returned to Flight Options, the company that you had founded and then reluctantly sold, but this time as an investor. And I was wondering if you could tell us, when data is screaming caution, warning, how do you decide whether to pull back or to lean in?
So part of that story was, here I am in this passionate industry that I love. And in 2000, so when a company's in trouble, when you have financial issues, there's two good ways out of it. One is to find a rich uncle, which I ran out of. And the other thing you can do is you can find a merger partner. And then you kind of restructure the company and rebuild it on the backs of how these two companies work together. And that's what I did in 2000. 2000 was the dot-com bomb.
Okay.
So the dot-com crisis. So we were in the middle of that crisis, and we merged with a company called Travelair, which is a division of Raytheon. And we did the merger with a 50-50 stock deal. When you do a 50-50 deal, we had a mechanism which they refer to as shareholders roulette. And shareholders roulette is when you have two 50-50 partners, and somebody wants to buy the other one out, and they make an offer to both buy and to sell, but at the same number. And then the other party can either accept the buy or the sell. It forces an honest price. So here we had this partner, Raytheon, who didn't want to be at all into the charter business. They were making missiles and torpedoes. And they had this company merged with that was making no money. In fact, it was losing money. So we went out, put the two companies together, restructured them, got Warburg Pincus, an investment firm, to underwrite the transaction. And they underwrote the valuation of the two companies at $360 million. So I went to Lexington, Massachusetts, where Raytheon is based, with a $180 million offer in my hand for their half of the business, thinking that there would be a Ken Rickey statue, because I brought them $180 million for this business that had no value. And they looked at me and thought I was cheating. And they bought the business out. And so in 2002 and 3, the whole passion, everything that we did went awry. And it was the worst time. I mean, when I look back on it and I think, wow, that was a tough time, because you're doing something you love, you're doing it with the people you love, and then you're separated from it. So in those next years, between 2003 and 2008 in the financial crisis, I actually left Cleveland because there was no kind of easy way to be here. If you ran into employees and they say, oh, it's not like it was, that doesn't make you feel good. And if you run into employees and they go, oh, it's running great, that doesn't make you feel good. So there's kind of a no-win way to be around it anymore. But I watched it from afar, and it struggled, and it had struggled. So the opportunity came back to get involved. Now, you say, what risks did I take?
Yeah.
The first meeting I had, but it had gone from Raytheon to a private equity firm whose investment thesis was to liquidate it. They thought the value of the planes was worth more than the business itself. And so they were just driving it into oblivion. And the idea was to kind of rescue this company at that point in time. So you say, what risk did we take? Well, I met with the equity firm and didn't like them at all. And I was like, we're not doing this. And I would tell you that my friend Steve Rosen, he forced me into the risk. I didn't want to take the risk. Thank you, Steve. So anyhow, the second risk really was the fact that we kept talking about how to restructuring. The problem at the time was they had gone unionized, and the pilots were sabotaging the business. And if the one thing I've been able to do is I can relate to the pilots, because that was my background in doing it. So and actually, Steve didn't take all the risk. There was a time where, to finish the transaction, which, by the way, was at $130 million. So that company was $360 when I left. We bought it back at $130. But we had to buy we had to sign personally on a $37 million note. And I had nowhere, there was this, and I've had a partner now for 45 years, Mike. And I said to Mike, we're going to sign this. He goes, we're not signing on that note. We're not doing that. And I said, Mike, we didn't have the first 4 million. What do we care about the remaining 33 million? So really, that was the risk, right? I mean, in for a dime, in for a dollar. What did it matter after that?
Absolutely. It sounds like 2008 tested financial resilience, but then COVID came along. And COVID tested whether travel was going to survive. How did you, in those months when we were just shutting down, how did you determine whether that was a structural threat or whether it was a temporary dislocation that would reshape demand?
You know, the rear view mirror is so clear, right? We know
Yeah.
now exactly what it was, but nobody knew at that time what was happening. I was on spring break with my youngest son, and this whole thing is coming down. Now, at that time, we were flying 300 hours a day, and we had days there were 8. So you could see, if you remember, we thought this was the plague. Nobody wanted to be in the same room with each other, right? Let alone in an airplane, let alone in an airport, let alone in doing any of this travel. So nobody knew what was coming. We just knew it was a catastrophe. And I remember being with Austin, and I would, we do something fun during the day, and I'd stay up at night, mostly with the team, working through, like, what are we going to do next with this? And Austin came to me, he said, Dad, what are you doing all night? And I said, well, Austin, I'm working on Dad's business. I go, it's really difficult now. I said, someday we might ask the question, what happened to that really fun aviation business? And you will say, well, we watched it. COVID took down all travel into the future. So we didn't know. But I will say, by that time, I'd been through 4 crises. Okay, you mentioned the 2008 crisis, the dot-com crisis. I was even there during Gulf War I, which was a big crisis in the industry at that time. And what I've learned after 4 crises is you never go quick enough to cut back, and you never go deep enough. You always tend to kind of, you react slow and you mosey into what you know has to be done. So I was determined that time that we moved quick. So, and deep. That meant CapEx. That meant cutting whatever expenses we could. But we have one of the company's fundamental principles is around our family. So we wanted to do it without having any layoffs. That was my rule. We're gonna slow down, but without layoffs. And we opened up a secure, confidential website. And we invited employees to take a voluntary pay cut in any amount. And we said it would be a loan. If the business came back, we would go ahead and repay it. But we were trying to conserve capital, because that's we're in a capital-intensive industry, and that's really important to us. And when we came out of that, over 90% of our employees took some voluntary cut, and about, I think, 11 or 12 of our employees took 100% pay cut, and that amounted to a $30 million savings for the company at that point in time, which was so significant. I think our target was in the 25 million of what we wanted to do. So yes, employees are in your hands, but what I've learned is that, being vulnerable, I actually learned this from my days flying President Clinton. President Clinton, when I first met him and I was being interviewed to be his pilot, we were having lunch, and he ordered a hamburger, and he said, and I'll take those sweet potato fries. And when he went away, he looked at me and he said, I just love sweet potato fries. They're really bad for me, and I'm not supposed to have them, but I got bad cholesterol. I just love those sweet potato fries. And later on, he would tell me that one of the ways to ingratiate yourself is to expose a fault. When you start a conversation by telling someone what's wrong with you, you immediately say to them, you trust them, or you're willing that they can believe in you. And so in thinking about COVID and what we were doing, what I came to that was, let's just tell everybody what the problem is. Let's not hide it. Everybody can read the newspapers. Everybody knows what it is, right? And so that's what had changed, because we had to run through that, embracing our culture, embracing our employees.
Yeah, when you talk to your employees that were around then, it's a point of pride to them that they contributed to the company in that way. And that's what we've heard from people. I did want to ask you, we've talked about managing through cycles. We haven't talked about managing through structural constraints. You're in private private aviation, when you commit to a fleet, you're effectively committed to the manufacturer ecosystem. And earlier this year, you reached a major settlement with engine maker Honeywell. And they are, obviously, they provide the servicing on the engines in your planes. When a supplier relationship begins to threaten your reliability or your enterprise value, how do you decide whether to absorb the pain or confront it?
Well, first of all, again, like COVID, when that starts to happen, I don't think you know what's going on. I look back retrospectively, I look back at it. I've read the emails through deposition and interrogatories, and now I understand what Honeywell was up to, but I didn't understand it at the time. So, we don't need to, there's a saying, if I needed to read the contract, I wouldn't do business with you. And I think that's the approach. I mean, there's so many things bad in a contract, and you can always find a nit or a gnat. But it's really the quality of the customer, the quality of the counterparty, right? Whether you can believe in that counterparty. And so for the first year that we had a problem with them, we just tried to make it well. We had meetings, and how are you going to fix this, and how are you going to do this? I think that the problem exacerbated so quickly because to give you just a little bit of background to make the story relevant. So we have, call it 300 engines on our fleet. So we have about 300 planes, about half of them have the Honeywell engines. And the way you make money in the engine business is you make a power by the hour. You charge every hour the plane flies, and then whenever there's a repair that comes due, it's included. And it's a cost control, it's a budgeting item. So what happened with Honeywell is the normal operator, I believe, that the normal operator flies about 400 hours, but we were flying 1,000 hours a year. And so this event, these major events that cost a couple $1 million and need a lot of parts from Honeywell, they were coming up, call it every 2 and 3, 4 years, 3.5, 4 years, where the rest of the world, and normally the event would come up in 10 years. So I don't think Honeywell wasn't prepared for the bow wave of repairs we were going to have. And in the transaction, in the agreement with Honeywell, we had a liquidated damages clause. So if they didn't return our aircraft into the air in 4 days, they paid us $30,000 a day. Early on in the transaction, they did that. And then when more and more planes started to come, they started to see a problem. And as opposed to meeting us and discussing and trying to resolve the problem, they dug in. And they began to tell us, we aren't going to fix your engine at all unless you waive liquidated damages. And so this is the first time a year in we start to realize this is what they're going to be. Fast forward now, they ultimately took the position never to fix an engine, to the point where 91 of our engines were not on the aircraft. We had aircraft without engines parked all over the country. And their strategy was to FlexJet will never be able to financially tolerate this. The bottom line is, yes, we won in court. That was not the optimum solution. I wish we'd have settled with them. I would have settled with them years ago for a lot less. The settlement was north of $1 billion. We would have settled for $270 million way before. What I learned, though, is that you talked about culture, right? You talked about indexing. What I learned was, in a company like Honeywell, nobody ever had the moral vision, the cultural vision to do what was right. They could have at any time gone and said this is right, but they were never programmed that way. They have a big legal department, and so they take problems and they move those problems to legal. And I'd say now, part of leadership, and we don't think about this, sometimes we think leaders can take the problems and hand them to subordinates. And I would tell you that the biggest problems the leader has to solve. Yeah. And that just never was able to handle at Honeywell. And so I think that's the take home from that, is that the leadership needs, whatever, people will index off the leader no matter what it is. Mm-hmm. I always say, if I stood outside the door of FlexJet with a clipboard, and everybody that wore a pink shirt I put a check mark by, people would start wearing pink shirts. They wouldn't know why, but if Ken was putting a check mark down because you had a pink shirt on, it must be important, right? So if leaders set that truthfulness, that customers are important, the organization will by osmosis adapt to that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, we've talked about risk and crisis and capital discipline and standards. The decisions that you made on those fronts have created enterprise value, but they've also created personal wealth and influence. And you've spoken publicly about building wealth, and then also about how you talk to your children about money. And so I'm wondering if you would tell us, how does your family discuss money? Can you elaborate on that a little?
Sure. So let me start by saying that the theory behind it is, we raise and teach our children so many things. We teach them how to swim, and then we take them to swim meets. They come home, they need us to do their homework, and we go back and we read about geometry that we knew nothing about, so that we could instruct them on geometry, right? And I even think about this. Some people will teach their children to shoot guns, and they don't assume that everybody that knows how to shoot a gun is going to kill somebody. We teach our children about sex, but we don't think that they're going to do all the bad things that are surrounding sex. But when it comes to money, we're just like, oh no, we can't talk about that. If I talk about that, they're all going to become entitled. The entitlement part is just the after. That's just what happens. But so I think it's really important. If you think about all the things that could go wrong in your children's life, the money one is kind of a big thing.
Yeah.
So we started very early. And early, if you think about what's the goal, number one is going back to Clinton. If I'm willing to expose things about me, about money, the kids understand that we're a transparent family. So it breeds transparency within the family. Early when they were young, it was about giving. And we would always talk about giving. We weren't taking balance sheets and doing return on invested capital, right? We were talking about how to give. And the youngest one always, every year they'd have a plan, and the youngest one always wanted to give to Disney. It was always Disney. But now as they're older, and my youngest one is 24, now we talk about, we have a regular meeting, and everybody transparently talks about their plan. They all tell their brothers and sisters about where their money's invested, what they're doing with it. And then inevitably another conversation starts.
So it's an education. It's
Absolutely.
a lifelong education.
Two things. Number one is that I want to watch my children enjoy their wealth. Why would I want them to go, I'm dead, and they go, oh, that dad was a great guy, right? I mean, why don't you get to watch them how they do it, number one? And then number two is you get to steward them through it, because it's not easy. There's a whole cottage industry waiting to take your money away. So teaching them and stewarding them about how to do that, I think, is really important.
Yes, that's interesting. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you, what is one business assumption that the leaders in this room should reconsider?
Well, I'm gonna make it two, but I'm gonna say one of the things that I'm asked about importance in business educationally, I always say don't underestimate the value of a partner. When you're a leader and you need to make these decisions, it's hard to do them solo. And so much of my success is because Mike and I have been at this for so many years. The second one I will tell you is that whether it's wealth or business profitability, I think you think of those things as a consequence. I don't think you think of them as a goal. I think wealth and profit are the consequence of execution. It's the consequence of what you do. I think if you're myopically focused only on the numerical, if it's quantitatively focused, I think you're doing a disservice. But as business, because of how we're educated, we tend to always think balance sheet, income statement. And I actually think, to some extent, execute, do what you want to do, and the profits are a consequence.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for coming
Sure.
today, Ken. We appreciate your time. And thank you to the audience for helping us recognize the 2025 class of newsmakers. We look forward to covering them as they make news in 2026.